Rachel stood staring at her reflection in the large bathroom mirror, her long hair cascading messily around her weary face, her tired eyes reflecting the dim, ambient light. She couldn't remember the last time she felt truly happy, but it certainly wasn't now. She gently ran her fingers over the creased skin around her eyes, where the stress and anxiety of the years had left their mark. Though Ethan always told her she was beautiful, even in her imperfections, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, shattering the silence that had settled over the house. Rachel jumped, her hands trembling. She turned toward the window and peered out. A shadow stood outside, dressed in a black coat, his face obscured by the darkness of the night. It was Jason. She knew, even though she didn't want to admit it, that he would come. Guilt and confusion overwhelmed her, but something deep inside urged her to open the door. Everything in her life seemed to be falling apart, but Jason, with his gaze full of desire and challenge, felt like something new, a remedy for the loneliness she couldn't find in her marriage. When she opened the door, Jason didn't say a word. He simply smiled, a gentle smile, yet enigmatic. He stepped inside as if this were his place. Rachel felt her heartbeat falter as he moved closer, and without a word, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist, she couldn't. All she could feel was an intoxicating sensation, her heart racing wildly. It was too late to turn back. The lies, the secret meetings, everything swept her away like a storm. She thought of Ethan, the loving husband she had once been, but now he was just a fading image in her mind. When had things become so complicated? Rachel didn't know, only that she stood at a crossroads, and there was no going back. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Ethan was home early. The living room door swung open. Everything went still, save for Rachel's heavy breathing and Jason's helpless stare. The three of them stood frozen for a moment. No words exchanged. In that instant, time seemed to stop. Rachel knew things had spiraled out of control. Rachel stood motionless, unable to look Ethan in the eye. She could feel his anger and pain filling the air like an uncontrollable fire. The image of Ethan in that moment walking into the room with a face full of shock and disappointment brought back memories of a time when everything between them had been perfect. She remembered their early days, when they were just naive kids, loving each other as if nothing could ever come between them. Ethan had been her first boyfriend, the first to hold her under the soft lights of their high school dance, the one she thought would always be by her side until the end. He always called her the most beautiful girl, even when she was just a chubby teenager, never feeling secure about her appearance. But to Ethan, she was always the special one, the only one he needed. And when they married, it felt like a dream. They had a cute house, 2 adorable kids, and nights filled with deep conversations, their laughter echoing through the house. She still remembered the first day they moved into their new home. Ethan had given her a bouquet of red roses, his eyes shining brightly as he looked at her, saying it was a symbol of their eternal love. "We will build everything together, Rachel. Together, forever," he had said. And she believed it. They had a happy family, despite the occasional arguments about who would take care of the kids or cook dinner. Little things that caused stress, but were normal in any family, right? But over time, as the kids grew older and their jobs consumed their time, the connection between Rachel and Ethan began to fade. The evenings spent together became rarer, replaced by silent glances at their phones, while Ethan became more absorbed in his work and unfinished projects. Rachel felt the loneliness creeping in, even though her husband always expressed his love for her. But those words didn't seem enough to fill the emptiness inside her. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a tired woman, no longer the girl who had once been the center of attention. She couldn't remember the last time she felt truly loved. When Ethan hugged her, it felt like an obligation, not genuine desire. The frustration began to seep into their relationship, and during the sleepless nights, thoughts of seeking something new, something different, consumed her mind. Then Jason appeared, a younger, confident, attractive man. He not only made her feel noticed, but he also brought her a sense of novelty she had been missing for so long. He came to the office last fall, and from their first conversation, she felt a strange connection, an attraction she had never experienced in her relationship with Ethan. Jason began to weave himself into her life, casual chats, small gestures of kindness, making her think about him constantly. Rachel knew she was heading down a dangerous path, but when she looked into Jason's eyes, she felt alive again. She felt emotion. She felt the longing that she had long forgotten. Every evening after work, they met, starting with trivial conversations, gradually turning into flirty exchanges. She laughed, but really, it was a laugh of escape. She was running away from reality, running from the dying spark in her marriage. Ethan began to sense the change in her. He noticed the times she rejected his attempts to be close, the silent glances whenever he looked at her, and although he didn't want to admit it, he knew something was wrong. The arguments grew more frequent, and each time, Rachel just wanted to run away. She felt guilty, but she couldn't stop herself. Her relationship with Jason deepened, and though in her heart she still loved Ethan, she couldn't resist the intense emotions that Jason awakened in her. She never thought she would reach a point like this, where she had to choose between a love that once meant everything to her and a man she knew would never be permanent. But she kept going, unable to stop. Everything felt too far gone, and at that moment, Rachel felt like she was standing on the edge of an endless abyss, unsure of where she would fall. For days, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Jason. She knew she was heading down a dead-end path, but their brief encounters, the light touches from him, made her feel like someone else. Someone she had lost a long time ago, the woman who was loved and desired. Every time Jason looked at her, she felt as though she were being worshipped, like a precious gem whose worth she had long forgotten. It was something she couldn't resist. One afternoon, while Ethan was buried in work at the office, Rachel received a message from Jason. "Can we meet? I know I should stop, but I can't stop thinking about you." Those words were an invitation, a challenge she couldn't resist. Her heart raced as she stared at her wedding ring, then at her phone. Just one more second and she could go back to being Ethan's wife, living the life of a model mother, or she could meet Jason to see if this feeling was truly worth it. In the end, the decision to meet him came almost without hesitation. Rachel stepped out of the house, closing the door behind her, and felt a wave of emotion rise within her. Each step felt like it was pulling her into a different world, one with no responsibilities, no obligations, just moments lived fully in her emotions. Jason greeted her at the CF, his gaze full of longing, and when she sat down, he didn't give her a chance to speak. He simply took her hand gently, pulling her close, and whispered, "I can't let you go anymore." Guilt surged within her, but at the same time, she felt an odd sense of release. All the worries about stability, about family, about the things that had become monotonous, vanished. It was just Jason and her, two people completely different from who they used to be. This thrill made Rachel unable to stop. She longed to be loved, to experience the passion she had craved but never found in her marriage. That very night, they shared an unforgettable evening. The emotions, the kisses, the passionate embraces seemed to lift all the burdens off her shoulders. Rachel knew she was betraying Ethan, but in that moment, she couldn't stop. Every time Jason whispered her name, she felt alive again, as if she were soaring in a world she never wanted to leave. The next morning, waking up beside Jason, Rachel felt like she had fallen into a trance. She glanced at the clock on her wrist, panicking as she realized she was late to take the kids to school. She rushed to get dressed, but in her mind, Jason's words from the night before echoed, hypnotic and captivating. She didn't know what she was doing anymore, but she couldn't deny the strange happiness she had just experienced. When she returned home, Ethan was already there. He sat at the dining table, eyes focused on a work report he was reviewing. He smiled faintly when he saw her. "Why are you in such a rush today?" Rachel forced a tired smile, feeling her heart tear in two as she looked at him, but she managed to respond, "Nothing, just busy, that is all." But inside, Rachel felt the guilt rise again. She knew she had gotten herself into a situation she couldn't escape, and every passing moment would be an endless battle. Her relationship with Ethan was no longer what it used to be, and her relationship with Jason only made her feel like she was living in a play she couldn't stop. Rachel tried to mask the guilt, but it tormented her relentlessly. She knew everything had changed forever, and there was no turning back. Rachel sat silently at the dining table, staring intently at the steaming cup of coffee before her. But inside, she couldn't find peace. Everything was spinning like an uncontrollable whirlwind. Jason still lingered in her mind, and the excitement from the previous night hadn't faded. When Ethan entered the room, he smiled softly, but the coldness in his eyes made Rachel feel like there was an invisible wall between them. She knew he was watching her, searching for some sign, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. "Can we talk for a moment?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, his gaze fixed on her. Rachel nodded faintly, her heart pounding in her chest. The questions in her mind echoed endlessly, but when Ethan added, "What is going on with us, Rachel?" He seemed so distant these past few days. The weight of guilt flooded over her, and the fear of what she had done began to choke her heart. The air around her suddenly felt suffocating. She struggled to say something, but all she could manage was, "It is nothing, Ethan, I am just tired." She had grown so accustomed to using this excuse. Whenever she needed to explain emotions she couldn't put into words, this was the line she resorted to. But in his eyes, she saw the unmistakable doubt. He no longer believed her lies. Suddenly, the front door opened. Jason's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Rachel realized, too late, that she had no control over the situation anymore. She felt cold sweat run down her back as everything seemed to slip beyond her grasp. She stood up, hastily moving toward the door, unable to control her steps. And just as she reached the doorway, Jason stood there, looking at her with determination, but also confusion. "Rachel, we need to talk." But when she turned back to look inside, Ethan stood there, his face twisted with anger. The two men locked eyes, and the tension in the room became unbearable. Jason stepped into the living room, his gaze fixed squarely on Ethan, an unspoken challenge in his stance. "We need to settle this," Jason said, his voice steady, yet carrying an unusual resolve. Ethan said nothing, only staring at Jason with eyes that seemed to burn through him. A minute passed, then two, in a suffocating silence, as if the entire world had stopped turning. Rachel stood between them, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to say. All her emotions crumbled inside her. She looked into Ethan's eyes, seeing anger, pain, and the rising tide of disappointment. He was no longer the man she once loved. But Jason stood there, like a new possibility, one she couldn't let go of. Then suddenly, a sharp sound rang out. Ethan lunged at Jason, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him away. The two men struggled, punches landing with force, the sound of fists colliding echoing through the house. Rachel screamed, trying to intervene, but it was all in vain. Everything felt like an uncontrollable storm. She watched as Jason fell to the ground, his face bleeding, his mouth twisted into a bitter smile, but Ethan's fury showed no signs of stopping. "Stop!" Rachel screamed, rushing forward to pull Ethan away, but his strength was too much. She felt like a helpless ship tossed in a violent sea. Finally, in a breathless moment, Ethan paused, panting, while Jason lay motionless on the floor, his eyes shut. Rachel sank to her knees, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. Everything she had done had led to this moment. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with tears, looking at her with a pain so deep it was beyond words. She saw the anguish in his eyes, the shame she had caused him, the man she had promised to love forever. "What have you done?" Ethan's voice cracked, his words thick with emotion. Rachel couldn't answer. She stood there, looking at him, feeling the destruction of a life, a family she had torn apart. With each passing second, Rachel felt everything slip further out of her control. She had lost everything. Rachel sat quietly in the darkened living room, her sobs long silenced, leaving only the sound of her shallow breathing and the quiet of the house. Ethan sat across from her, his eyes still red, but the anger had faded, leaving only exhaustion. With every passing second, she felt the rift between them deepen. Realizing what had happened couldn't be undone. She had done something unforgivable, and now all she could do was sit there, looking at the wreckage she had caused. "I can't go on like this, Rachel," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm, as if he had made his decision long ago. "Everything has changed too much." The words cut through her heart like a blade. She knew she had lost him, lost everything that had once made her happy. She could only look up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice weak, filled with regret. "I was wrong. I don't know what I did." The apologies seemed meaningless, but it was all she could say in that moment. She knew that no matter what she said, what had happened couldn't be undone. This marriage, this love, had crumbled under the weight of her wrong decisions. Ethan stood up, not sparing her another glance. "You have to face what you've done," he said, then turned away. She heard his footsteps echo through the silent room, each step seeming to take him farther from her. Rachel turned her head to look out the window, where the morning light was slowly creeping through the curtains. But no matter how beautiful that light was, she couldn't feel anything but emptiness. She had lost the man who had loved her most, and now she was left with nothing but crushing loneliness. She looked down at her hand, where the wedding ring no longer held any meaning. The memories of a happy family, of nights spent together laughing, were now nothing more than the ghosts of the past. She remembered the days they had worked together to maintain their home, cared for their children, shared joys and sorrows. But now it was all just a fairy tale that had ended. In the days that followed, Rachel tried to reach out to her children, but they only responded with cold stares, short words devoid of warmth. Madison, her eldest daughter, was the only one who still faced her. But every time Rachel tried to apologize, Madison only shook her head and walked away. "You're not my mom anymore," she said, before retreating to her room. A month passed, and Rachel's life became a never-ending stretch of days. She tried to focus on work, but nothing brought her joy. She moved into a small apartment, a place where there were no traces of the happy memories that once filled her home. Everything felt hollow, and her days were spent in silence, alone with her thoughts. She returned to work, took on new jobs, met new people, but no one could replace what she had lost. She began to realize that, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't change the past. It was far too late. But on the quiet, lonely nights, when the dim light reflected off the table before her, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. She missed him, missed his warm hugs, missed the smiles he gave her, the times he gently touched her hand as they spoke. She had broken everything, and now, only an unhealable regret remained. Rachel knew there was no way to reclaim what she had lost, and perhaps, for the rest of her life, she would carry this pain. She had made the wrong choice, and now all she could do was continue living in the shadow of those decisions. But one thing she could do was keep moving forward. To keep living, even though she no longer had the most important things in her life. She knew that no matter how hard she tried, she would never forget the loss. But at least, she could learn to live with it, and perhaps one day find peace within herself.